The monarchy provides, with the Constitution, a degree of long-term stability that is actually quite hard to come by any other way.
In addition to being involved with more than 300 charities, she carries out more events than any other royal, and carries with her that sense of responsibility passed on from her mother, the Queen.
Camilla just got humiliated by Princess Anne in the most savage way imaginable. Right in the middle of planning a private summer stay at Sandringham, Anne looked her dead in the eye and shut her down completely. She called her lawyers and had the exact wing Camilla had already chosen for herself legally sealed before she could get anywhere near it. Staff who saw it happen said Camilla was shaking with a rage and humiliation she could not control or hide. But Anne had barely even started. What she did next left Camilla completely speechless, that she had no response, no comeback, and nowhere to turn. The confrontation and what was really at stake. Let me tell you exactly what Camilla did to Anne. She sent a representative to the administrative office at Sandringham Estate with a very specific instruction. They were to find every internal usage record for the northeast private wing of Sandringham House, every documented stay Anne's household had ever made in that wing over the past several decades. They were to pull all of it and then change it, not delete it. That would be too easy to catch. Instead, the instruction was this. They were to quietly rewrite each entry so that instead of reading Princess Royal Household Usage, it reads General Royal Household Usage. So when anyone looked at the paper history of that wing, Anne's name would simply not be there. Her family would not exist in those records at all. Their history there would have been entirely wiped out. Camilla was going to make it so that when the time came for her to use that wing, there would be no documented basis for Anne to object. No record that Anne's family had ever had any specific claim there at all. Anne would be standing at a door that the paperwork said had never been hers. And then Camilla screamed it directly into the staff faces that if they made a single mistake, they would be fired immediately. She stood over them, and she made absolutely certain that the fear of getting it wrong was the last thing they felt before they walked out that door. By now, Camilla was certain Anne would be completely cornered with no way out. This was her world now, and she was ready to make absolutely sure Anne felt every inch of that. And I need you to feel how cold Camilla's action was before we go any further. Anne had not done anything to provoke this. She had not made any new claim on that wing. That wing had simply always been part of how Anne's household used Sandringham. For decades, it was one of those unwritten royal family understandings that nobody had ever needed to put on paper because nobody had ever questioned it, until Camilla decided to erase it. You see, in British estate law, if a family member has used a specific space consistently over a long period of time and there are records proving it, that creates a legal right to that space. Not really ownership, right? But a recognized legal claim that nobody can simply brush aside. And the only way to kill it is to kill the paper trail behind it. That is exactly what Camilla was doing. She was not just planning to move into that wing. By destroying the paper trail, Anne would lose every legal tool she had to fight for it. That was her goal. And Camilla almost got away with it. She came dangerously close, but someone had been watching her. A staff member who had worked at Sandringham for over 20 years. Someone Camilla had spoken down to one too many times. Treated like furniture one too many times. Now, it was payback time. When the reclassification paperwork landed on their desk and they were asked to sign off on it, something snapped. They pushed the papers aside, and then they picked up the phone and made a personal call directly to Anne's private secretary, not through any official channel that could be traced or intercepted. And before they made that call, this staff member had reportedly told the people closest to them exactly what they were going to do. They said Camilla had gone too far, that somebody needed to deal with this fake queen, and it was going to be them. They picked up that phone and they burned Camilla's entire plan to the ground. Anne received that information on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, her lawyers were fully briefed. By Monday, they had submitted a formal legal filing directly to the estate's administrative office in Norfolk, not through Buckingham Palace. This matters because Buckingham Palace is where Camilla's people sit. That is where information gets filtered and quietly redirected. By going directly to the estate office, Anne bypassed every layer of that machinery completely. What Anne's lawyers submitted was a formal document that said this. Anne's household has used this specific wing consistently for decades, and here is every single piece of evidence proving it. And once that document exists, nobody can simply override it or make it disappear. Removing it requires a formal legal process that would force Charles to take his own sister to court over his private estate, which means it becomes a catastrophic public nightmare that nobody in that family wants. By the time Camilla's representative called the estate office asking for a progress update on the reclassification, it was already completely over. The filing was done. The window was sealed. Anne had moved so fast and so quietly that everything was finished before Camilla even realized the counterattack had begun. And now she was going to make sure Camilla felt every inch of her selfish act. Because there was an intimate family dinner coming up at Windsor that Charles was hosting. And Anne had already decided exactly what she was going to say when she got there. She was going to completely embarrass Camilla. That dinner happened mid-March 2026. Camilla was already seated when Anne walked in. And the moment Anne stepped through that door, Camilla's face cracked for just 1 second. Her eyes went tight, sharp, like someone who had just heard a sound they were not supposed to hear. Then just as quickly, her face went completely smooth again, composed, controlled. But the damage was done. Everyone near her had already seen it. She had been told Anne was not coming, so why was she standing there? Camilla straightened in her seat and reached for her glass, but her mind was already running. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Anne did not look at her. She sat down and she looked straight ahead. The lunch started. People talked. Charles said things in the careful, measured way Charles speaks when he is trying to hold something together with bare hands. Someone mentioned the gardens. Someone mentioned something about the weather. The kind of conversation that exists only to fill the silence so nobody has to acknowledge what is sitting in the middle of the table, like something dead. And then the conversation paused. A natural gap. Everyone reached for their glass at the same time. Anne then put her fork down. She looked directly across the table at Camilla. Not a glance. Not a passing look. She really looked at her straight on with eyes that had already decided everything, and she said, "I have been aware of what you tried to do at Sandringham. Those records, the ones you wanted changed. I've handed everything to my lawyers. It's done. There is nothing you can do about it now." Then she picked her fork back up. The silence that hit that room afterward was not a normal silence. It felt like something physical. Charles stared at his plate like a man who desperately needed the floor to open beneath him. The staff near the doorway froze. Every person at that table suddenly found their food completely consuming. Camilla let it sit. 1 beat, 2 beats, and then she smiled. Not a startled smile. A slow, warm, completely prepared smile that had been sitting ready and waiting for exactly this moment. She looked at Anne almost gently and said, "I'm not sure what you mean. That sounds very much like estate management gossip, Anne." Her words were warm, light, almost sympathetic, like Anne was a slightly confused woman who had been handed some bad information, and Camilla felt genuinely sorry about the mix-up. Everyone sitting at that table understood in that instant that what Camilla had just delivered was a performance, one she had rehearsed and had sitting ready before she even walked into that lunch. Anne nodded once. She did not smile back. She did not respond. She returned to her plate, and she did not look at or speak directly to Camilla again for the rest of that meal. Charles sat between these two women and said absolutely nothing. The silence between Anne and Camilla for the rest of that lunch was so cold and so crushing that people who were there said it felt like sitting inside a room where something had been completely destroyed and everyone had silently agreed not to say so. Now you need to understand what that wing actually is. The northeast private wing of Sandringham House sits away from every public and monitored part of the estate. It has its own garden entrance on the quiet side of the grounds, its own kitchen, its own staff access completely separate from the main house. and alongside it runs a network of secondary roads through the estate that vehicles can use to arrive and leave without passing a single staffed checkpoint, without appearing in any official log, without leaving any record that they were ever there. People could come and go from that wing and disappear completely. In a world where every movement connected to the royal family is tracked, that wing was a blind spot, and that blind spot was worth everything to Camilla. Everyone on the outside thought Camilla had her eyes on that wing just because she wanted a quiet summer stay at Sandringham. And on the surface, that is exactly what it looked like. Sandringham closes to the public every year between July and August. Charles heads to Balmoral in Scotland every summer without fail. So the estate would be essentially empty, private. No king, no official schedule, no palace staff monitoring every door. Word had reached Anne that Camilla was planning to spend that window at the northeast wing, a peaceful summer retreat. That was the story. It was nowhere close to the truth. Anne knew the whole truth, and it was a very dirty one. Anne knows Camilla has a network, a group of people she has been cultivating quietly for decades, before she was even queen. These people are her aristocratic friends whose names never appear on any official royal schedule. They also include former press contacts who have been shaping how the public sees this family for years, political allies who sit in powerful rooms and owe Camilla favors they have never had to repay. And Anne's people had been watching all of it for years. They watched stories about the royal family appear in the press that always somehow made Camilla look good, and always somehow made the people she wanted gone look terrible. They watched decisions get made inside the palace about senior staff, about household arrangements, about who had access to what, decisions that nobody could fully explain, but that always moved power in one direction, toward Camilla. Anne knew Camilla's network was behind all of this. At that wing, these people could have arrived and left through the secondary estate roads without a single record that they had ever been there. But here is where it gets truly dark. Anne's people had been picking up something that went far beyond press manipulation and quiet influence. There were conversations happening, private conversations between people in Camilla's circle and people connected to one very specific question. What happens to power inside the royal household when Charles can no longer hold it? Not if. Who takes control of household decisions? Which senior staff get to stay and which get removed? Who sits in the rooms where the real choices get made when the king is no longer able to make them himself? These were not casual conversations. They were planning conversations. And they were happening in private estate spaces where nothing could be recorded and nothing could be proven. Camilla was not planning a summer holiday. She was planning to turn that wing into a private operations room, a place to build and cement her grip on power before Charles was gone, a place to decide who ran what and who answered to whom in the monarchy that was coming. And every person she brought through those secondary roads, every quiet decision made inside those walls would vanish completely the moment the door closed behind them. Anne did not just block a summer stay. She shut down something that could have changed everything about what this family looks like after Charles. After that dinner, Camilla reached out to her team and found out that Anne had indeed sent in a legal filing. All her plans had been ruined, and what she did next was not what anyone in that family was ready for. Camilla's response, and the nuclear ending. There is a kind of fury that does not scream. It does not break things. It pulls completely inward, goes absolutely still, and starts calculating how much damage it is willing to cause. That is what settled over Camilla when she understood what had happened. And before you can understand what she did next, you need to understand exactly what she had just lost. Because it was not one thing, it was two. And losing both simultaneously did not just humiliate her. It ripped apart something she had been carefully constructing for months. The first is the private network, but the second reason is even more personal. According to sources, Camilla and Charles had been locked in a sustained private battle for weeks over how to completely sever the monarchy's public connection to Andrew. Camilla wanted it total and permanent. Charles kept pulling back from the edge of it. The tension between them had been building and building with no resolution, and Camilla had reached the end of her patience with it. The Sandringham retreat was her answer. She was going to physically remove herself from Charles, go cold, go completely silent. Let him feel the full, suffocating weight of her absence until he came back to her on her terms. Both plans were now dead, killed by a legal filing that had been completed before she even knew it had started. Refusing to accept defeat, Camilla went to Charles. She walked into that room and she stood over him like she was the one wearing the crown. She told him Anne had taken legal action on property that belonged to him personally, his estate in case he forgot. Her eyes were hard and absolutely locked onto his face as she said it. She told him his sister had sent lawyers onto his land and carved out a legal claim without asking him a single question. She started moving as she said this, back and forth, one hand cutting through the air. She emphasized that Anne had not called him, had not warned him, had not shown him the most basic respect of a conversation. She stopped moving and looked directly at him. She did this on your property, Charles, without asking you, without telling you. What does that tell you about what she thinks of you? The words were coming faster now. She was almost breathless. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his face, and she said, "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she thinks you have no authority left at all." She stood over him, waiting, like she was looking at a little boy who had completely lost control of his own home and had not yet realized it. She had turned a property dispute into a direct question about whether the king was actually in control of his own house. Staying silent now did not mean staying neutral. It meant publicly conceding that his sister could do whatever she wanted on his land without consequence. Charles only told her he needed time to think. He never came back with an answer. Camilla waited 4 days. She sent a message through an intermediary asking for Charles's position. The intermediary returned with nothing. Charles was not ready to act. He needed Anne too deeply. She had shown up for him throughout his illness in ways he could not set aside. And somewhere beneath all of his silence, he understood that what Anne had done was not wrong. His silence was a verdict. And Camilla felt every hour of those 4 days land on her like something cold and final and crushing. Within 48 hours of receiving nothing from Charles, 2 things happened at the exact same time. The first move was invisible, and it was lethal. Camilla picked up the phone and started making calls. One by one, she reached out to her network, the people who attended the most exclusive private dinners in Britain and sat in the most powerful drawing rooms, and who, with just a few quiet words in the right ears, could completely destroy how someone was perceived without ever making a single public statement. She gave them one message to carry. Anne had not made a legitimate legal move. She was a bitter, desperate woman who knew her time at the center of this family was over and was completely falling apart over it. She was not protecting anything. She was throwing a tantrum dressed up in legal language. Her judgment was gone. Her actions were an embarrassment to everyone around her, and the people closest to the family were genuinely starting to worry about her state of mind. That was the message. Carry it everywhere. Say it to everyone that mattered. Camilla's people went to work. They carried that message into every private dinner, every members' club, every drawing room conversation happening at the top of British society. They whispered it carefully, and they whispered it consistently, and it spread, quietly, steadily, reshaping how the most powerful people in Britain thought about Anne, one private conversation at a time. None of it could be traced back to Camilla. Not one word. Anne could not respond to it because it was never said publicly. She could not deny it because it had no source anyone could point to. It simply existed everywhere, doing its damage silently, and there was absolutely nothing Anne could do to stop it. The second move was visible and deliberate. Camilla canceled 2 joint public engagements with Charles that had been confirmed on the schedule for the following week. She was showing Charles 2 things simultaneously. Through the Whisper Network, she was showing him what she was capable of doing to Anne if he continued to produce nothing. And through the canceled engagements, she was showing him what she was capable of withdrawing from him. Their visible unity. their public partnership, the image of a functioning king and queen that the monarchy depended on. She was holding it up so he could see it clearly and then showing him what it looked like when she chose to pull it away. Now here is where the floor drops out completely, because everything up to this point was still a war being fought inside private rooms, contained, targeted. But what Camilla did next was none of those things. She instructed her private secretary to formally raise a request with the king's private secretary directly. The request was for a full institutional review of all private usage arrangements across every royal estate property, every informal agreement, every unwritten understanding, every gentleman's arrangement that any member of the royal family held over any space on any royal estate anywhere in Britain. Sit with that for a second. She was not fighting Anne's legal filing. She was calling for the entire system that had produced it to be torn open and examined from the ground up. Every arrangement every family member held over every space. Andrew's arrangement at Wood Farm on the Sandringham grounds itself. William and Kate's long-standing connection to Anmer Hall on the same estate. Every quiet, unwritten, historically understood agreement that kept this family's private life functioning. She would rather detonate the entire foundation than accept that Anne had beaten her inside it. If Anne's claim was going to be legally protected, then no claim anywhere would be safe. If everything burned, then nothing belonged to Anne either. She was not losing gracefully. She was not regrouping quietly. She was flipping the entire table rather than accept that one person at it had outmaneuvered her. When word of that request reached Anne, she sat quietly with it for a moment and then said something the people around her have not forgotten. She said she had expected it, because Anne had not filed a legal document and hoped for the best. She had built something that could withstand exactly this. The paper trail her lawyers had constructed was not just thorough enough to survive a family dispute. It had been built to survive a full institutional review. Camilla had tried to erase her from the history of that wing. She had failed. Camilla had tried to use Charles to override the filing. He had stayed silent. She had tried to use her network to make Anne look bitter and broken and finished. Anne had said nothing and let her do it. And now Camilla was threatening to burn down the entire system of royal estate arrangements rather than accept a single loss. Anne was still standing there, completely still, jaw set, eyes hard, whatever Camilla was willing to destroy, whatever she was prepared to threaten or set on fire. Anne had already changed the rules of this war permanently. She had moved first, she had moved smart, and she had made absolutely certain that when the real assault came, everything she needed was already in place and already beyond Camilla's reach. Camilla could burn whatever she wanted. Anne would be standing in that doorway when the smoke cleared, and she would be ready.